Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. I'm posting this as a warning. There are things out there that you don't want to know about. Stay away from them. Don't go looking for them. I'll tell you my story in hopes that it will quench your curiosity. It was a night like any other night, at least lately. I had barely arrived at the ranger's station, and there were already 4 calls of vacationers' homes getting broken into. Out here in the West Virginia Wildlife Preserve, people tend to think that just because they plant some houses that the animals should somehow know and respect boundaries. That's kind of tough when the animals are on a huge plot of land where they've never been hunted and never even been threatened by anything other than a bigger animal. Folks seem to think this is a great vacation spot for them. What they don't realize is it's also a great vacation spot for the animals. I hopped in the company truck and started toward my first destination of the night. An elderly couple had been terrorized by a deer that literally broke in through a sliding glass door. They managed to trap it in a side room and needed someone to go release it. I got elected. When I got there, the vacationers looked like the ones caught in headlights. They were still wide-eyed. I could tell they were in shock. I had them go into another room and close the door. Once they were out of the way, I found the closest door to the outside and opened it. Then I went to the room with the deer in it. I slowly opened the door and was shocked to find the room covered in blood. The deer was laying on the floor panting. I approached it slowly, circling around to leave the doorway open, hoping to give it an escape route. The closer I got, the more I realized this deer wasn't going anywhere. Its side was covered with claw marks. At first I thought a coyote had attacked it, but the marks were too far apart. They were large enough to be caused by a bear, but the individual claws were too far apart. I'd never seen anything like this. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say Freddy Krueger sliced it up. The deer's eyes went wide when I approached it, but it didn't jump up and run. I took this as a bad sign. Its breath came in ragged gasps as I struggled to roll it over. Once I did, it was my turn to struggle breathing. Its entire side was torn to shreds, but that wasn't the worst part. There were large chunks that were missing. I examined the wounds and found bite marks where the missing flesh should have been. But the bites were massive. If it wouldn't have challenged the laws of nature as well as my own sanity, I would have said it was bitten by a shark. Blood poured out of the side, and the deer struggled to draw breath. I stood and left the room, leaving the poor creature the dignity of a private death. When I went back and it was still, I took pictures with my cell phone and tried my best to carry the creature out without making more of a mess. After I got it loaded on the back of my truck, I went back inside and talked to the vacationers. When I opened the door to the room they were in, the woman's eyes grew wide and she started screaming. The man's eyes were the size of saucers as well. I approached them slowly with my arms outstretched to try to calm them down. It seemed to have the opposite effect. They started climbing the furniture and clawing at the walls to get away from me. I decided to back away and give them some room. "What's wrong?" I said. The man pointed a shaky finger at me. You're covered in blood," he said. "The deer got you," the woman said. "You've got rabies." "Or worse," the man said, keeping his distance. "I'm sorry, folks," I said. "This is the deer's blood." "You killed it just for breaking in?" the woman said. "What? No, it was already injured. I just took it to my truck." The couple seemed to settle down and consider this. "So you don't have rabies?" the man said slowly, looking me up and down. "Or anything else?" the woman said, hiding behind her husband. "No, ma'am, I'm fine." She took her turn, eyeing me up and down, I assumed looking for wounds. Being satisfied, they asked the one question I didn't want to answer. "So what killed the deer?" the man said. "I really don't know," I said truthfully. Having just gotten them calmed down, I didn't want to send them back into a panic. "It was probably just a coyote," I said. "A coyote?" the man said, diving back into the pool of panic. "Or a bear," I said, trying and failing to calm them. "A bear?" the woman said, diving in after her husband. "You know, folks, you've had a traumatic night," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, I'd—" "We're leaving," the woman said, dragging her husband out of the room. "That sounds like a good idea," I said. And then, like an idiot, I added, "I hope you enjoyed your stay." They either didn't hear me or ignored me. Either way, it wasn't long until I heard a car start, then roar away from the house. I went back into the room where the deer had been trapped and started working backwards from there, trying to find out what had happened. It wasn't hard to pick up the trail. It had been bleeding badly. Seeing the bites and claw marks made that fairly obvious. I tracked back through the kitchen and out the smashed glass door. Once outside, I turned on my flashlight. The trail was a little harder to follow, but not much. I could still see drops of blood beside its tracks as I followed them back toward the pond behind the house. I approached the pond and saw signs of a struggle. This must have been where the deer was attacked. There were other tracks in with the deers, but they didn't make sense to me. They were large, too large. Their shape was odd as well. If I had to call them anything, I would have called them duck prints. But massive, larger than any duck by many times. A giant duck with sharp teeth. I think I'll leave that out of my report. I thought. It suddenly struck me what the tracks were. It was a man with swim fins on his feet. But why? Why go to all that trouble to poach a deer when you can just knock it out with a tranquilizer gun? My mind sent me an answer, but I didn't like it. What if the man is a psychopath, just getting his kicks by killing an animal with his bare hands? I thought about the mental hospital in the neighboring county and wondered if one of their patients had taken an unsanctioned leave of absence and they were trying to keep it quiet. I didn't like that thought one bit. Aside from the fact that it didn't explain the huge bites on the deer, it also meant we had someone who might suddenly get a taste for killing. Doing this to animals was horrible, but what if he decided to go after something bigger? I shot a look at the house, wondering how many vacationers were within a short walk from this spot and how many were armed. As I contemplated the safety of the people in the area, I heard something behind me. I whipped around and shone my light, but saw nothing. I scanned the pond and saw a ripple emanating from the middle. Probably just a fish jumping. I took some more pictures of the struggle area with my phone, then started back toward my truck. I had more calls to answer, and this riddle would have to wait. I drove halfway around the lake, around 3 miles, to the other vacation home where a break-in had been reported. When the woman in her 30s answered the door, she took a step back. "Oh my," she said, looking at the dried blood all over my uniform. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry about my appearance," I said. "Did you report a break-in?" "Yes, we did. Please come in," she said in a friendly tone, yet gave me a wide berth while closing the door. She led me upstairs to the kitchen. For some reason, I was expecting to find blood all over like with the last house. However, this was a completely different mess. She showed me the door. It had been forced open, but not shattered like the last one. There was only a small amount of glass broken. Then the door latch had been unlocked, and the door slid open. There were faint images of my giant duck tracks like the last house. My spine turned to ice. This house was over 3 miles away from the other. There were many more people in that space that might have fallen victim to this crazed person. The woman showed me the rest of the kitchen and the mess that had been left. There were a few cans of sardines that had been opened and eaten, and also some cans of tuna fish. The strange thing was how they were opened. The cans had been torn into with something sharp, but not a can opener. The marks looked like they were torn open with claws. I shuddered to imagine the amount of strength it took to do something like that. And then I spotted it. Beside one of the cans of tuna was a small puddle of blood. "Ma'am, could I trouble you for a sandwich bag?" I said. She handed me one, and I carefully tried to scrape as much blood into it as possible. I sealed it and put it in my pocket, then went out through the broken door. Behind the house, just like with most of these vacation houses, there was a pond. I traced the tracks back to it, and they disappeared at the waterline. I shone my light over the water, but the only thing I saw was a stray turtle. I stared at it for a long time, as though it would somehow give me a clue as to what was going on. "What should we do?" the woman said, nearly scaring me half to death. I hadn't heard her follow me out the door and into the yard. "I'll send someone around to look at that door in the morning," I said. "In the meantime, it might not be a bad idea to sleep in a room that has a lock on the door. I'm sure they won't be back, but just in case." She didn't seem very comforted by that idea, but thanked me as I left. The next 2 reports were just teenagers breaking in and stealing beer. That was it. No bloody wildlife, no weird tracks, just kids being kids. I went back to the station, changed out of my bloody uniform, and spent the rest of the night filling out reports on what had happened. When my shift was over and I passed on what had happened, I took a little trip to the neighboring county. I stopped in at the mental hospital and asked if they had any escapes lately. The nurse looked at me like I had asked her if she was wearing deodorant. "We don't have escapes," she said with obvious pride that showed as arrogance. I thanked her and left, feeling less than satisfied with her answer. Next, I stopped in at the local police department and asked one of my friends on the force if they could analyze the blood sample for me. I shared my thoughts that there might be an escapee from the mental hospital, and the blood sample might help us find out who and track him down. It was well past noon until I got to bed. That night when I got to work, it was pandemonium. There had been more break-ins, and people were starting to panic. The owner of the resort was frantic. People were canceling left and right, and wanting their money back. When I walked in, he stormed his pudgy face right up into mine. "You told people to go home," he fumed, glaring up at me. I merely suggested, "Do you want to pay their rental out of your salary?" "I work for the state, not you," I said. He turned a deeper shade of red. "Would you rather see people in body bags instead of animals?" I said, "That wouldn't do much for business, now would it?" He turned fire engine red and stormed out mumbling, "We'll see." I investigated 5 break-ins that night. Only 2 of them were legit. The rest seemed like half-hearted attempts to stage a break-in so they could get out of paying for their rental. The 2 real ones shared the same characteristics as before, just enough of a broken window to open the door. The cans of whatever seafood was available. They even got shrimp out of the freezer. Everything about the way the intruder acted pointed to a person. All I needed to know was who. Again I followed the tracks back to the nearby pond. I stood for a long time studying the surface of the water. I knew these ponds were all designed the same. A roughly 40-yard by 40-yard body of water around 5 feet deep in the middle, stocked with mostly bluegill for catch and release fishing. Anyone using these ponds to hide would have to be holding their breath for inhuman periods of time. I stared at the surface for 20 minutes. If someone was out there, they had an invisible snorkel or an extra set of lungs. After my rounds of investigating and reporting, I decided to stick around and do a little extra investigating. I ran home, grabbed my swim trunks, mask, and snorkel, and went to the site of the most recent break-in. I waded out into the water, unsure of what I would find, when a snake slithered past me. I let it go and waded deep enough to where I could swim. I hovered at the level of the surface, dipping my mask underwater to get a glimpse of whatever there was to see. There wasn't much. Fish, underwater plants, and lots of water. Just what you would expect from a pond. As I kept going towards the middle, the water was getting deeper. I now couldn't touch the bottom. I had to float on the surface. Looming in front of me was a dark spot on the bottom of the pond. I took it for a rock, but swam close enough to investigate anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. As I drew close enough to hover over it, I realized it wasn't a rock. I took a deep breath and dove to find out what it was. The further I swam down, the further I was able to swim down. I kept going and going. Light disappeared. I was sure I had been swimming straight down for a solid minute without touching the bottom. I turned and looked up. The surface of the pond was only a pinprick of light. My lungs screamed at me to turn around. I had no choice but to comply. I clawed at the water in desperation. It seemed like I was swimming in mud, or something was pulling me down. Almost like a force or current pushing against me, wanting me to drown before I could fully explore this hidden secret. After what felt like an eternity, I broke the surface of the water and gasped for air. I swam over to the shallows and walked out of the pond. I collapsed on the shore and lay there for a long time trying to regain my breath. As my brain received oxygen, I thought about what had happened and if it had been real, an illusion, or if I had just gotten turned around somehow and stuck at the bottom. I had to find out. I wasted no time driving 2 counties over and renting some dive equipment along with a light. So armed, I returned to the pond and walked toward the middle again. This time when I dove toward the dark spot, I was able to see exactly what it was. I used the flashlight to examine the darkness. As I swam deeper, the sides closed in on me as if I was swimming down the gullet of some massive fish. I've never been claustrophobic before, but that was rapidly changing. I barely had any room to maneuver as the sides closed in. I contemplated turning around, but there was no room. I could feel myself start to panic. I had to focus to keep my breaths regular. I was very close to a panic attack when suddenly the tunnel opened up again. The sides grew further apart. I checked my watch and I had been under for 15 minutes. The sides of the tunnel had spread out so far they were barely visible, and I could see a light ahead of me. I swam toward it, desperate to get out of this water. I broke through the surface and looked around. I was in the pond. Somehow I had gotten turned around and was back in the pond. I swam to the side until I could stand and walked out to the shore. Looking around, I made a startling discovery. I was in a pond, the same one as the break-in last night. Somehow there was a hidden tunnel between the 2 ponds. That's how the robber never gets caught. He just swims to the next pond slick as snot. No fuss, no muss. I now knew the how. but I needed to know more. As tempting as it was to swim back through the tunnel, I was still a little shaken and didn't want to risk an underwater panic attack. I walked back to my truck, took off my dive equipment, and drove back to the dive shop. I asked about frequent customers, especially for refilling tanks. They told me they had a few regulars that came in every weekend, but no one knew, and no one who needed refilled more than once a week. I asked if there were any other dive shops in the area, and they told me the next closest one was over 100 miles away. I went home frustrated. It wasn't making sense. He would need air to swim back and forth through that tunnel, and that was his escape route. I was sure of it. I tried to sleep through the afternoon, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. It was working on the impossible puzzle of how the robber was getting air. I borrowed a couple trail cams and set one up at each pond. I needed to see if he had some new tank system or what. I also wanted to identify him and shut him down fast. I made sure to stay away from those ponds that night so he would feel free to do his thing. In the morning I gathered the cameras and took them home. I downloaded both memory cards before watching the video. Just as the second download was finished, my phone rang. "Hello," I said. "Hey John, it's Steve. I got the results from that blood you gave me the other day." "Great," I said, hitting the play button on my computer. "Were you able to get a match on any hospital records?" "Not exactly." "Why not?" I asked as a ghostly green image appeared on my computer. The image was blurred, but it was definitely the size of a man walking upright toward the camera. I clicked to the next slide and froze at what I saw. "Well, the thing is, the blood you gave me came back as reptile DNA. I registered the words he said in my mind, just like I registered the image on my computer screen, but I just couldn't place them in reality." "Are you there?" he said into the phone. "Yes, I'm sorry," I said. "Could you send a copy of your findings to my office?" "Sure, no problem." "Thanks, I appreciate it. You really helped me figure this out." "Anytime," he said cheerfully before hanging up. I hadn't taken my eyes off the computer screen the whole time. No matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't make my mind acknowledge it as real. Standing there, large as life, was not a man in a wet suit. It was a creature. I could see the wide mouth full of sharp teeth that looked exactly like the bites on the deer. I could see the webbed feet that looked like swim fins, only they had claws sticking out of the front where toes would be. I saw the razor-sharp claws on its webbed hands. It was a full-on nightmare staring me in the face. I sat back and thought for a long time. Then I printed copies of the images and put them in an envelope. I rushed to the station to share the information I had with my fellow rangers. As I was showing them, their faces ranged in emotions from shock to disbelief to outright mocking. As I was going through my investigation, the owner of the timeshares walked in. "What are we all looking at?" he said, eyeing me with contempt. "It seems like John has solved the case of the break-ins," one of the other rangers said. The owner approached. He picked up the lab report and read it, then stared for a long time at the picture. "Do you know what this is?" he said absently. "I really don't know yet," I said. "I've never seen anything like it." He turned to me and smiled. "This is money," he said, holding up the picture. "What do you mean?" I said. "Those idiots that go around hunting, what do they call them? Cryptids?" "Yeah, cryptids. They'll pay through the nose if they think they can find something like this. And then there's the TV shows and merchandising," he said. "You may have saved my financial hide." He beamed at me. "I don't think you understand," I said. "This is a dangerous animal. If you had seen what it did to that deer. So what do you want to do? Hunt it down and kill it. Maybe not kill it, but definitely tranquilize it and take it to a secure location where it can't hurt anyone." "You dumb son of a bitch," he yelled. "I could make a mint. I wouldn't even have to repair those houses. They would all rush in to investigate and leave piles of cash in my bank account. But what about the people?" "Who cares about the people?" he said. "Throw them all out. I've got the chance of a lifetime beating down my front door, and you want to flush it down the toilet because you're scared someone might break a nail." He was breathing hard and staring up into my face. The air was charged with fury, his and mine, and then a sudden calm came over him. "Charles," he said, addressing the lead ranger, "isn't this a wildlife preserve?" "Yes, it is," Charles said warily. "And aren't the wildlife on this preserve protected from all tampering by law?" "Well, I guess so," Charles said. "What if those animals present a threat?" I said to Charles. "How many deer were killed by coyotes on this preserve last year?" the owner said. "Dozens," Charles said. "Were the coyotes removed from the preserve?" "No," Charles said. The owner turned and shot me a triumphant look. "John," Charles said, "I know you have everyone's best interests in mind, but you're gonna have to let this go." I glared at him. And what happens when this thing decides it likes to eat humans? All the eyes in the room that had been on me suddenly found somewhere else to look. All but the owner. He was smiling from ear to ear. I think the pudgy little bastard was about to break into the happy dance. I searched the room for any support, but found none. I pulled my badge off my shirt, quietly laid it on the desk and left. If that was the end of my story, I would say I had failed. I took my pension and rented one of the houses on the preserve. The owner had leaked through social media that a cryptid had been spotted on the preserve. As he had guessed, the cryptid hunters and TV crews came in droves, renting everything in sight. My goal was different. I already knew it existed. I knew how it got around without being detected. I stayed at one of the break-in houses. Every night I took a huge tuna I had bought fresh that morning and laid it out beside the pond. I sat in the dark living room and watched the first night as it approached the fish with more caution than curiosity. After sniffing it for a long time, it grabbed it and dove for the pond. Each night after, I laid out a fish and the creature became less cautious. It was being fed and the media frenzy was starving. The hunters had found nothing. There were no sightings as long as I fed it. Everyone had their cameras set up. The few that roamed around left me alone when they saw someone in the house. I guess they thought I was another cryptid hunter and respected my privacy. As the number of sightings stayed at 0, they started turning on the owner, calling him a fraud. His reputation plummeted. After a week with no sightings, people started leaving. In desperation, he did the wrong thing. He hired an actor to dress in a creature suit and roam around. Of course, the hunters and shows saw right through this and destroyed what was left of his reputation. I had rented the house for 2 weeks. Between the rent and the fish, my money was running out. I had kept the people safe, but what would happen when I stopped feeding it? I had managed to clear out most of the people so they would be safe, but what about my fellow rangers? What would happen when it became desperate? When the starving creature no longer had houses full of food to break into? I had 3 more nights until I had to leave. I was out of money. The preserve had become a ghost town. As far as I knew, I was the only renter left. It was decision time. I sat staring at the large tuna on the table with a bottle of bleach next to it. Let it live and see what happens, or kill it. I thought about this for a long time. Both options had merits and consequences. I chose a third option, a much more dangerous one. I took the fish out and laid it where I usually did, then backed up a few feet and stood there. Over an hour passed before the water stirred. I saw the head and eyes of the creature appear as it headed toward the fish. And then it stopped. It had seen me. I made sure to keep still with my arms at my side. It slowly approached and stood. It was a few feet away with the fish in between us. It studied me and sniffed the air, then became agitated. Perhaps it had smelled my scent before as a pursuer. It let out a soft hiss, but bent down and took the fish, keeping its eyes on me the entire time. Then once it had its meal, it did the most incredible physical display I've ever seen. It leaped 20 feet in the air and landed in a perfect dive right in the middle of the pond, leaving almost no splash. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and collapsed to the ground shaking. Once I had recovered, I went back inside and fell into a fitful sleep. That was only part of my plan. The next night would decide who lived and who died. I did exactly like the night before, minus the fish. The creature approached, stepped up to me, and looked around for the fish. I showed it my empty hands. It sniffed at them and growled, having smelled the scent of fish. It looked at my hands, and I wondered if it was going to bite them off as a substitute. It hissed at me and sniffed my face. I saw it flexing its claws the whole time. I stared into its face, those massive razor-sharp teeth, and swallowed hard. I did all I could to stay still, to show it I wasn't a threat. My heart hammered in my chest. It opened its jaws and showed me those horrible teeth. Its breath was a horrid stench I had never smelled and hoped to never again. I closed my eyes, not knowing if they would ever open. Seconds fell into minutes. I opened my eyes and I was alone. There wasn't even a ripple in the water. I sighed. My decision had been made. It had shown restraint, and I would too. I went back inside, packed and left. I could only hope and pray that the people that remained, including my former co-workers, would be safe. I went home and slept restlessly. In the morning there was a report in the newspaper on a break-in at the wildlife preserve. They said the only thing that was taken were cans of tuna fish. I smiled ruefully and wondered how long it would stay that way. If you're reading this, don't go looking for this thing. If you see it, don't tell others about it. Just leave it alone and hope for the best. A narrator reached out to me after finding my stories on creepypasta.org. I usually ignore these requests, especially when they begin with, "I'm starting a new channel," because they often ask for my work for free. Sometimes, to add insult to injury, they're not even narrating but just using AI. I was going to close the message when the narrator followed up with, "You'll be paid a flat fee of $300 per story." That perked up my interest. "Why so high?" I messaged, and was informed that I would have to sell all rights to the story. It would belong wholly to the Scream Collector, the channel, and I wouldn't be able to reprint or repost anywhere. If I accepted the commission, a list of guidelines would be emailed to me. "How long do the stories have to be?" I asked. 2,000 to 4,000 words, they replied. The stories would be released in a kind of anthology centered around the fictional town of Pinefell. I was the first author contacted, but if the channel was successful, the anthology would be expanded to include other writers. The stories would all be published by the Scream Collector, or TSC as the name was displayed on the channel logo, with the conceit being that they were all true stories being shared by the titular collector of Pinefell. In short, I wouldn't get any writing credit, since my stories would all be penned by the collector. $300 per story was decent money, but selling all rights? Not even getting my name attached? I messaged back that I'd have to think about it. TSC said of course, but not to take too long because they were contacting other writers, and I might lose out on the opportunity. In the end I accepted because of the money, obviously. I mean, how many times had I let my stories be narrated for free in exchange for exposure? And how had that panned out for me? No, this time I'd take money. Given how stereotypical the channel looked, they only had one video, introducing the town of Pinefell with a spooky and obviously AI, voice. It didn't seem like I'd have much room for creativity. I'd just be writing formulaic, trope-filled, utterly generic creepypastas. I was sent a contract in standard legalese about what we'd discussed. I'd sell all rights for $300 per story to belong to TSC, the Scream Collector. After I signed and sent back the contract, they sent me the guidelines. This is where things got weird. I was asked to write the story in a Google Doc. I'd be sent a link to the shared doc, but I wouldn't be the primary owner, and would have no power to change the settings or anything like that. The document would belong to the channel. I found this a bit controlling, but I was told since all stories were set in this shared universe in the small fictional town of Pinefell, and had to have shared elements, and since I was giving over all rights, and it would belong to the channel, they'd rather have it in their own Google Doc. Made sense, I guess. And they had some standard stipulations like 2 to 4K words, minimal dialogue, PG-13, mild swearing okay but no F-bombs. All pretty normal for a story that would wind up being used as a narration. But after this part, I'm just going to paste the rest of the guidelines here so you can read them. Write only in the Google Doc and not in any other document or file. You may only write in the Google Doc between the hours of 6 to 8 p.m. You may not make any edits or changes outside of those hours. Somewhere in the story include the phrase, "Nasi wi-fi mhc ta ko tai rt." Do not speak this phrase aloud. Before writing, check your closet. While writing, be sure your door is locked. After writing, if the story is not yet finished, say aloud, "Scream Collector, do not come. There is nothing to collect," then close the document. If the story is finished, say aloud, "Scream Collector, come and collect," and type FIN at the end of the document before closing it. This was all so bizarre. I mean, I assumed it was some sort of weird roleplay based on the channel concept, but the contract hadn't mentioned anything about it, so I messaged back TSC. These aren't real guidelines, right? You don't seriously want me to only write between 6 to 8 p.m.? TSC, the guidelines are part of a team effort for the universe we're making, so yes, everyone involved needs to play along, writers included. That's why we're paying such a high price, and you'll be expected to follow the theme we'll send for each story. Write between 6 to 8 p.m., follow all guidelines. You only have to be in character while writing. The rest of your day is yours to be OOC. That's why the limited time frame. So do you still want the commission? Why/N? What if I break the guidelines? TSC, your payment is contingent on delivering a story that complies with guidelines. If your story doesn't meet our guidelines, you won't get paid, or you'll be paid at a reduced rate, or otherwise penalized. Do you still want the commission? Why/N? In the end, obviously, I took the commission. And the very first story I was asked to write, ironically, was a rules story, the most popular kind on YouTube and the Creepypasta website. Here is the prompt I was sent. The protagonist is a visitor to an Airbnb in Pine Fell who finds a strange list of rules. They disappear after breaking a rule. Their body eventually found dismembered in suitcases and lunchboxes hidden around a playground. Story should include 3 to 7 rules. See attached playground photo for inspiration. I opened the attached photo of an old, abandoned playground in tall grass with a bright yellow spiraling plastic slide. Ugh, I thought. A rules story, really? The most basic spaghetti of creepypastas. I finally came up with some rules after Googling pictures of Airbnbs and looking at some of the rules hosts often have for guests. I tweaked a few normal rules to make them seem just a little off, jotted them down, and was about to type them in the Google Doc when I realized it was only 11 a.m. Per the rules guidelines, I couldn't begin writing until 6 p.m. Such a stupid, arbitrary rule, though it seemed bad form to break it immediately, especially given the nature of the story I was writing. And I wasn't getting paid until I actually delivered said story. At 6 p.m., I was about to finally start drafting when I remembered the check your closet rule. Such nonsense, I grumbled, getting up to stalk over to the closet and fling open the door. My one-bedroom apartment has 2 closets, one with sliding doors in the bedroom, the other a coat closet in the living room. I guess the bathroom also has a linen closet, but it's so small it's almost more of a cupboard. Anyway, I checked all of them. Then I plunked my butt into my desk chair and opened the Google Doc and then remembered the lock your door rule, so with a sigh I got up to check. But I generally always keep my door locked, and today was no exception. So I sat back down and started typing. The story came easily. I don't know if it was because of the 2-hour time limit or what, but my fingers flew, and before long the entire story was finished. I even included the phrase "na siu oi fi mhc ta kotai rt" without any awkwardness. Just had it scrawled in a room in the Airbnb, adding to the overall creepy vibe as the protagonist settles in. Once or twice while writing, I spotted the cursor for another viewer on the Google Doc. Soon enough I finished writing. I cleared my throat, rolled my eyes so hard they almost fell out of my head, and said aloud, "Hey Scream Collector, come and collect." I typed FIN. Instantly the story vanished. The screen was just blank. The entire Google Doc wiped. I started to freak out. Not because I feared it was supernatural, I'd already seen the other cursor on there, but because my 2 hours of hard work, all those words, how could I prove that I actually? Just then I got an email. The money was in my PayPal account. I'd just been paid $300 for the 2,500 words I'd written. I also got a new message with the next prompt. A couple who are lost in the woods just outside Pine Fell meet a skinwalker. At the end, only their skins are found. Attached was a photo of some generic pine forest along hilly trails. I sighed at the prompt. Not only another cliché, but a culturally appropriative one. Was every story going to be something off the top 10 tropes list? What next? A grizzled detective and some unsolved murders. A bunch of kids meet Slender Man. Still, money was money. The next day, I started writing at 6 p.m. after checking the closets and locking the door. I didn't finish the story, though, because I've never been a big fan of Lost in the Woods stories. I like nature. I find it beautiful and relaxing, not scary. Not to mention, I wasn't sure what to do instead of a skinwalker. For now, I was going with generic predatory monster, but after getting halfway through the draft, it just wasn't creepy enough, and I erased almost all of it. The time was 7:58 p.m., so I logged off. I fell asleep thinking about how I could make this Lost in the Woods concept genuinely scary, and around 2 a.m., I woke up with an idea. I went to the Google Doc and added a description of an unseen predator that devours the insides of its prey, leaving only the skins like the husks of fruit. I was pretty groggy, not fully awake, until suddenly I noticed the lines I'd just added were being deleted. Someone was on there, and they erased the words I wrote as I was writing. My heart thudded in my chest. Suddenly I was wide awake. I remembered the rule about not writing except between 6 and 8 p.m. It had seemed like some sort of ridiculous role play, but the fact they were actually enforcing it, that was creepy. I closed my laptop and went back to bed. I just ended up lying awake wondering who was up watching the Google Doc, and why had my lines been deleted? Did that mean I wouldn't get paid? All the next day I kept thinking of that other cursor on the Google Doc. It was there again at 6 p.m. when I finally sat down to write, popping in and out, though it didn't actually make any edits this time. It took me 4 days, but I finally finished the story. Not my best work, but scary enough, I supposed. I typed the last paragraph, describing the gory discarded skins, the painted pink fingernails now stained with blood. And then I typed FIN, right at 8 p.m., and called out to the collector. And just like before, the story vanished, and money appeared in my account. Apparently my breach wasn't so terrible as to prevent my being paid. Though I did get a warning in my inbox, a single line reminder, only write in the Google Doc between the hours of 6 to 8 p.m. Next came a prompt about some kids encountering a Slender Man-esque figure. Ha! Called it! Once again I struggled with this common cliché. How to make it interesting. Maybe instead of a tall figure, I'd make the baddie short and squat, while still keeping with the disappearing kids theme. Unfortunately, even though I was eager to write, I had a lot of other things scheduled between 6 to 8 that week. When I messaged TSC to ask if the 2-hour window could be shifted, I was told no, but that I could take up to 2 weeks to finish the story, and that would be fine. I was able to finish the story in the next week, and got my payment. The next prompt was the absolute worst. I almost refused to write it. The narrator works as a security guard on the night shift, and strange things have begun happening. Oh, for crying out loud. Every other YouTube narration is about a security guard, always on the night shift, usually with strange rules. Between that and the FNAF franchise, isn't it time we bury this trope for good? And yet, the pay was fantastic for the amount of effort I was putting in, which was almost none. By now the first couple narrations had already come out, with the third on the way, and the audience honestly seemed to enjoy the stories no matter how trope-filled and unoriginal. So fine. Whatever. I was kind of glad my name wasn't attached now, because if it were, I'd have had to spell it S-E-L-L-O-U-T. But my hatred of all these tropes led me to rebel in a different way. I stopped following all the guidelines. For example, I refused to check my closets. Would I still be paid? And I began writing at 5:58 p.m. Everything I typed at 5:58 was erased, and I got another warning. But the checking the closet thing didn't have any impact. I realized nobody was actually watching me check my closets. I could ignore that rule, and the door one. The only thing being monitored was the Google Doc. I started breaking the rules pretty regularly after that, just as a small act of rebellion. Even refusing to include the signature statement in my latest story. It got added in after, I heard in the narration. I still got paid, but with a 10% deduction for forgetting the phrase. While I was writing these shittiest of creepypastas, part of me kept wondering, what's the point of having these silly rules? Why check the closet? Why call out to the collector? I still did this one because I thought it was funny. What was the significance of the weird phrase I always had to include? If I said it aloud, would it summon a demon? I did say it aloud, and nope. Was it all just roleplay? Were the creators of Pinefell that invested in their little universe? I suppose that must be it. Eccentric, but then plenty of podcasts have their own unique thing where listeners get to play along. All part of the fun. At least that's what I thought at the time. Until I woke up one morning and saw a local news article in my Reddit feed. You have to understand, I'm a hermit. I avoid social interaction as much as possible, and since I work remotely I rarely hear about stuff happening. Especially lately, I've been tuning out the world, and when I'm not writing or working, I'm playing video games or watching YouTube. My point is, I was kind of up to date on some national or even international events because of social media chatter, but local news wasn't something I paid attention to. But the article that popped up in my Reddit feed caught my eye because it was so sensational. A man's dismembered body was found in a suitcase and lunchboxes scattered around an abandoned playground. My first thought was, shit, was this crime inspired by my writing? That had been the very first story, and it had debuted on the channel a couple weeks prior, so it was definitely possible. I went to the narration itself and found that, while initially it had only a little over 1,000 views, it was now getting a lot more attention, because apparently someone had noticed the connection to the news. I clicked a link to another article about the killing, and this one included a photograph of the playground where the suitcase had been found. As my eyes darted across the image, my heart dropped to my toes. It was a different photo, but the tall grass, the stained yellow plastic slide spiraling down from the playset. I recognized this play area. Fuck, I muttered. That was enough for me to reach out to the authorities. After reviewing the stories on the Scream Collector channel, the police discovered that there was a second story with striking similarities to recent murders. The bodies of 2 missing hikers had been found at a state park. Or rather, their skins had been found, piled beside the trail like husks of fruit. And what had stumped investigators was the fact one of the victims had nails painted pink. The sister-in-law of the victim with painted nails said she initially didn't believe it was her sister's remains. because her sister never wore nail polish. Never. The investigators concluded the polish was applied post-mortem, but couldn't understand why. Now they knew. It was so that their bodies matched the details in the story I wrote. It makes me sick. I'm terrified they'll find more victims. Children from the Slender Man story, or a security guard from the overnight shift story. And it's my fault. My words were the inspiration. Let this post serve as a warning. Be careful about accepting commissions. Ghosts aren't real and strange rules won't kill you. And most of what you hear in horror films or narrations isn't true. But I'm making this post, here on Reddit, the so-called front page of the internet, to warn you that there are truly sick people out there. People who do their best to make horror stories become a reality. The Scream Collector hasn't been caught yet. I just want to forget my part in all this and get on with my life. Just pretend that I had nothing to do with any of it. But I know I need to share the truth. A warning. So I'm posting this here, and on our /writing, and our /true crime, and everywhere and anywhere to warn people of the danger. Oh, there's one more thing I haven't told you yet. That weird phrase I had to add into every story, na siu oifim hc ta kotai rt. The one I got penalized for leaving out. The investigators pretty quickly pieced together what it meant. I feel so stupid for not having seen it myself. They're quite sure it was meant for them, and for listeners in general, and maybe for me too, and that it was a taunt by the Scream Collector. If you read it aloud backwards, it says, "Try to catch me if you can." Update. Oh God, it's been 4 weeks since I typed this all up and I chickened out and didn't post it. But I just got a link to a new Google Doc and a message with a new prompt. Write a story about a serial killer who leaves clues in creepypastas. Eventually investigators track down the clues to the writer. But when they show up at the writer's home, they find the writer already dead at the keyboard. See attached photo for inspiration. I open the photo, and it's a picture of my living room. Fuck me. I'm typing now. I've got the Google Doc open. It's currently 6 p.m., and I'm praying that if I seem to be typing like it's another story, the collector won't come for me yet. I've texted 911. I keep toggling between the Google Doc and this post. It's going live now. I'm broadcasting it everywhere. But fuck me, I'm wondering about those rules I thought were random. Like how the nonsense phrase was a hint. Try to catch me if you can. And I wonder if the other rules also hinted at something I've been too slow to figure out. I wonder why I was told to always check my closet. An asteroid was supposed to hit Earth on Friday, March 7th, 2025, at 12:27 a.m. Eastern Time. I don't know much about the people in power, or why they decide to keep events like this hidden from the public. I am here to tell you about the boy who stopped it. His name was Noah. I never knew his last name. He, like me, was 18 years old. Noah's favorite TV show was The Walking Dead. He was obsessed with BioShock and excited for The Last of Us Season 2. Inside clinical white walls, I grew up with him in a facility for teenage superheroes. It's perfectly normal for a 10-year-old to think he has superpowers. When I was 10, I was eating spaghetti when a suited man stepped inside my house and shot my mother dead. The man had an excuse. Apparently, I was already doing irreparable harm to her with my radioactive energy, and she was 3 weeks from suffering an aneurysm. He held out his hand, wore a wide smile, and said, "Did you know you have superpowers, kid?" I did not know I had superpowers, but he explained it in ways I both did and didn't understand. He told me babies born in 2007 had a certain genetic mutation inside them, an evolutionary gene which caused psychic phenomena. I asked how that related to radioactive energy, and he just grinned and told me I was a funny kid. I was taken to a top-secret facility where I would learn to harness my awakening abilities. The facility had been built specifically for us, to build a group of people with psychic phenomena to save the planet from threats. I had grown up loving superheroes, so this was a dream come true. I didn't even realize I was slowly killing my mother. The facility would be a new start for me, and like all of my favorite teen superheroes, I could grow up just like them and save the world. Now that is what I thought, because I was 10 years old. I could barely even register my mother being shot dead. The facility wasn't exactly a 5-star experience, but for a newly orphaned kid who was definitely fucking traumatized, I didn't complain. It's not like we were completely cut off from the rest of the world. We could watch TV, and there was a games console in the rec room. There were exactly 20 of us, and all of us had had the exact same experience. A man had walked into our home, murdered our parents, and told us we had superpowers. I thought I could tolerate the daily tests. Every day after lunch, we would be individually taken inside a room. They weren't so bad at first. I was asked questions, and I had to answer them. They quickly moved to physical tests, telling me to run on an exercise bike or complete a math test. I expected something more akin to actually testing my superpowers. I still didn't know what my power was. The man wearing the white lab coat told me I was a level 5 for psychic phenomena, but I still felt the same. I tried to move things with my mind and tune into other people's minds, but I felt nothing. Yes, the people at the facility assured me I was coming into my powers, but I felt like an idiot. One test in particular twisted my body into knots, and I couldn't stop the scream ripping from my mouth, my body jerking, forming an arch and slamming back down. But I was excited. This was the first test that felt real. My nose was bleeding, and my body was aching, but for the first time since I arrived, I could finally feel it. My ability, running through my veins, blooming inside me. I still laughed, forcing my chest to breathe, my lungs to inhale oxygen, despite my screams. Gloved hands gently held me down, but I was shaking with excitement. I was a superhero. I was going to save the world. 8 years later, we got the first call. I was violently pulled out of my bed and dragged downstairs where we were told to stand in a line. A man with a gun marching up and down. His name was Callan, and sometimes he offered me sour candies. Callan wasn't nearly as cold as he tried to make out. When we were kids, he would pull faces at us to make us laugh. As teens, he called us little brats. That morning, however, Callan was significantly pale in the cheeks. I wasn't supposed to eavesdrop on adult conversation, but these soldiers were loud. Earthquake and tsunami. Nankai Trough. It's predicted to be over at 10. One soldier muttered to another. I think that's what he said, at least. Something slimy crept up my throat when even the hard-faced soldier started cursing. Noah, who was standing next to me, nudged me, his lips curled into a smirk. I had known him since my first day, when I broke down in front of him, and he was kind enough to offer me a snuggled candy bar. This is what we're here for, right? He whispered. You. The soldier barking orders at us stopped in front of a small girl, Elizabeth. I heard her power was super strength. Elizabeth had never actually shown us. Using our abilities was a strict no-no outside the testing rooms. Elizabeth was a bitch. I don't mean that in a shitty way. I mean she was the facility's answer to a mean girl. As a child, Elizabeth bragged that she was the most powerful, and also pushed me into the girls' shower rooms. For zero reason other than gathering her clique of equally annoying friends and laughing at me. As a teenager, she was somehow worse. Extremely loud and actively picked on newbies. Noah shot me a look, rolling his eyes. I can't say I was happy that Elizabeth had the fate of the world on her shoulders. I was super salty as she turned to the rest of us and mockingly saluted, before being pulled away. The last thing I saw was her bobbing orange ponytail. She was already demanding to sit in the front seat of an awaiting Hummer. As you all know, or don't know, since all of this is away from the public eye, Elizabeth saved you. She stopped the earthquake. I wasn't sure how, but I had an idea, and Noah had a fun imagination. When I got back to our room, he was loudly reenacting the moment Elizabeth stopped the earthquake from happening, balanced on his bed, his arms spread out, pretending his blankets and sheets were the quivering earth beneath her feet. Aha! He mocked, her voice laughing. I've stopped you now. His audience were rolling their eyes, but smiling. Noah did a great impression of her, which was funny, because Elizabeth regularly mimicked his lisp to make everyone laugh. We all waited in anticipation for the queen bee to return. I was secretly dreading it. I had a feeling she was going to keep us all up all night, sneaking into the boys' dorm with the girls, and going on and on and on and on until I threw a pillow at the head. Still, though, I was excited to hear about her very first mission to save the world. But Elizabeth never came back. Apparently, she had joined a senior team, consisting of older high school kids. I thought, good for her, I guess. But I did get a little emotional waking past her room. As frustrating as she was, Elizabeth was part of our group. I didn't like that she had left her stuffed teddy on her bed. She had been clutching it the day she was dragged into the facility at 10 years old, her eyes raw from crying, almost hollow. I remember she was staring forward like she wasn't sure where she was going. When she opened up to the rest of us, Elizabeth told us her dad had been shot in the head, and she was taken away. Then she was separated from her little brother, who was put into a van. Elizabeth wore a brave face. I know it's for my own good, she said with a wide smile, but her lips were always curved a little too much, like she was planning to one day use her powers against the ones who took her. My roommate, however, was glad and maybe a little jealous. Elizabeth was gone. She's a big shot now. Noah rolled his eyes, nudging me in the cafeteria line at breakfast. I was trying to choose between oatmeal or toast. Noah picked for me, grabbing me a bowl of oatmeal and dumping it on my plate. I had a feeling his ability was mind reading, because he knew exactly what I was thinking about. Of course she's not coming back, he scoffed through a mouthful of unidentified meat. Noah's hair was growing over his eyes. I told him to cut it, but he said it made him look cool. I, however, thought it looked like one of my mom's photos as a teenager. Lizzie's probably joined some super secretive superhero team. He took the opportunity to once again mimic her voice. He was right. I was overthinking. The following week, we got another call. Growing up, I had come to realize when the bright yellow rotary telephone started to ring, it wasn't a good thing. This time the woman answering it puked everywhere. Asteroid. That's all I heard when usually empty hallways began to fill with soldiers. The information from the call spread quickly, and I had never seen grown soldiers cry before. The woman who answered the phone was still sitting on clinical white tiles, her head in her hands. Throughout my time at the facility, our guards maintained a cold, authoritative tone. But I could see it cracking. Some turned on each other. Others found comfort in each other. But they were all screaming the same thing. A space rock, twice the size of Chicxulub, the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, is going to strike the Indian Ocean on March 7th at exactly 12:27 a.m. An extinction-level event. Again, none of this information was shared outside the facility. Not even world leaders/scientists/astronauts. Per protocol, the first people who heard about potential world-ending disasters were us. At the time, I guess they were using psychic phenomena to predict these events. As usual, 19 of us marched into the briefing room and stood in a line. This time, Noah was pulled from the line, his hand slipping from mine. I didn't even realize he was holding my hand until his clammy fingers were being yanked away. Noah looked scared, but I think he was excited. He shot me a sickly smile. I'm going to send it flying back into space. He tapped his temple with a grin. With my telekinesis. I figured in the testing rooms my roommate really had mastered his superpowers. It's not like he told me about his ability, which twisted my gut. Telekinesis was huge. But I also understood his preference to keep his superpower from the rest of us. I watched my Noah jump into an awaiting car, shooting me one last grin. "See you on the other side," he yelled. I didn't realize until he was gone that I didn't want Noah to join some top-secret organization filled with powerful older kids. I went to bed feeling sick. I was yet to fully come into my ability. I didn't even know what it was. I kept wondering if I was a mistake. Maybe my recruitment was an error. Yes, I admit, I was jealous of my roommate. But Noah would be jealous of me too. The man who murdered my mother told me I was extraordinary, and I would be fulfilling a purpose. But I still felt like a regular, ordinary teenager. I was aware of several kids waiting for the asteroid to pass, but I was too tired. I woke the next morning to the adults cheering. He did it. Noah saved us. I could already imagine how fucking excited he'd be. I was excited for him. I completely forgot the number one rule. Do not leave your room until after 9. I jumped out of bed, excited to share my exhilaration with the other kids. Noah had saved us. 2 of the girls, Serena and Beth, were definitely awake. I could hear them excitedly chatting to each other. I pushed open my door, stepping into what we had called the lonely hallway since we were kids because it had a dead end. Noah, of course, used it as his prime hiding place during hide and seek. There were so many storage rooms to explore. It was a hide and seek paradise. Something stopped me in my tracks, though, when I left the comfort of my room. It was the sudden stink of iron that caught me off guard. I was so used to the hallways smelling like bleach mixed with oatmeal drifting from the cafeteria. But this was stronger, biting into my nose and throat. I didn't realize I was still barefoot until I was standing in something thick and warm, trickling under my feet. Something slimy crept up my throat, my nerve endings on fire. Blood. A red streak trailed across clinical white tiles. The lonely hallway stretched all the way to the other side of the facility, and I found myself following the long, bloody smear winding through the sterile white. I started to run, my heart in my throat, when I heard slapping sounds. The smears of red became thicker, darker, until I was following a flowing red river down white. When the slapping noises stopped, I looked up. Noah was slumped on the floor, his throat opened up, eyes still wide, lips frozen in a grin. That's what the slapping noises were. The sound of his body being used, like a fucking mop, smearing blood. The man carrying him held him like a trophy, fingers entwined in my roommate's bad haircut. The smear of blood wasn't accidental. It was purposeful. Noah's blood was supposed to run, to trickle all the way down the lonely hallway. The soldier dragging him looked gleeful, almost drunk. When he dropped to his knees, giggling into the floor, muttering about offerings and how grateful he was, how much he respected them, I turned around and walked back to my room, half aware of Noah's blood still slicked between my toes. It truly hit me when I climbed into bed and let myself scream. I was so fucking scared. Noah wasn't a superhero. He was an offering. We don't have abilities. We're not genetically mutated children with psychic phenomena. We are sacrifices, offered to stop potential world-ending disasters. Just like Elizabeth, whose body I found in a waste chute, her body twisted like a pretzel, only recognizable from her hair. I was dragged from my room that same night. They strapped me down under intense white light, held a scalpel to my throat, and forced me to say it was a dream, that I imagined it. If not, I would be the next sacrifice. So I did. I played along. I told them I imagined it. We got another call a week later, March 14th. The phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing until someone answered it. The soldier was Callan. He was calm, nodding, saying, "I'll let them know." Then he dropped the receiver, pulled out his knife, and slit his throat. I don't know what it is this time, but it was bad enough for one soldier to tear out his eyes. The people who kidnapped me as a child and turned me into a sacrifice started to go insane, quitting their jobs, screaming, running around, trying to force their way out of the steel doors locking us inside. I used the opportunity to gather the others and get the fuck out of there. The security guards, usually standing in front of our rooms, were gone. I saw one of them trying to stick the barrel of his gun down his throat. The thing about the facility is that the people running it always use the same threat against us. If you go outside, you'll hurt people, and it will be your fault. But now we know the truth. We're nothing more than glorified sacrifices, offered up to satisfy something far greater than us. If you tell a group of traumatized children they're superheroes enough times, they'll believe it. We escaped several days ago. Whatever was said on that call shook them enough to quit their jobs and call their families. The usually padlocked doors leading to the outside world were open. So we took the opportunity and ran. I had never seen the complete breakdown of a person before, and now I was seeing it on a massive scale. These people were crying, screaming, and begging each other for inside information. I found it hard to believe they had the audacity to want to live, to survive whatever is coming, when they had brutally sacrificed my friends with not an ounce of empathy. I hope they all rot. Currently, we are in hiding, and I'm terrified these people are desperate enough to hunt us down. Will they kidnap more kids or come after us? I don't know what's coming, and I wish you luck in surviving whatever was on that phone call. Whether that's today, tomorrow, or sometime in the future. Noah and Elizabeth saved you once, and then twice. I'm sorry, but we can't save you this time. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level. Far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her. Don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name on my contact list before my inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you are with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. But it was excruciating and exhausting. Almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with somebody was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I could never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself, almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sexually active together, but still in the dating phase. We were at that make or break era of a blossoming relationship where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd start to slowly drift apart. The latter of which I don't think I'd be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivated me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed. How she'd caress the pendant of her necklace when she was frightened. How she'd twirl her hair in her finger when she was excited. All of it. Her smell. Her smile. Her eyes. Yeah, I know. It probably makes you sick reading about it. I feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type, but now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I'd think about us doing the long 3-hour hike up to that magnificent view from one of our first dates, to that first kiss as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and, well, you know what would happen next. All right, fine. I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple of months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet. I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power over the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here, writing this out at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We'd never actually spent a night together. No matter how late she was over, once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger. Just a casual kiss goodnight, a smile, and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it. But after almost 8 weeks of dating, it was becoming strange. I'd have to ask her about it. It took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk would come eventually, she started. She took in a deep breath with a long drawn-out exhale. Recently, she paused again. I've started talking in my sleep. She shook her head in embarrassment. It's called somniloquy, I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanor seemed to say, that's it. No, Stephen, listen, she said. She wasn't laughing. It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No, it's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things. She was starting to raise her voice, breath heavy, and tear up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night. I told her she was probably exaggerating. I was wrong. That night she stayed at my house. But she warned me of something before falling asleep. Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disoriented if that happens. And don't respond to me. Just ignore it. I nodded and agreed. If it becomes too much, she continued, just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind. I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave to the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't even last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours passed, but I woke up in the dark with the sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered. She was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled, but then I noticed the shadowy outline of her sitting up on the bed. She was looking down at me, staring. It creeped me out. I'll admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. Then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard. It was much lower and gravelly, like something out of a horror movie. I'll chew the skin from your bones, she said. I froze. At first, I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I expected. I thought it would be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed. Just random swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew the skin from my bones? But then she just lied down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her, but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking, maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her. And her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted. Something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again, in the same voice as before. If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by morning. That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. I was lying on the couch, but I wasn't going to be able to fall back to sleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, hoping to see the first few hints of the sun rising. And then I thought I heard something. From the bedroom. I listened, and then I heard it again. Stephen. It was that same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first. But then it continued. Stephen. Still I said nothing. I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom? The voice barely sounded human. Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you? I still didn't say anything. I was told not to, but I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking, so I didn't. And then I heard her once more. Sorry if this spoils your plans. She began laughing. The two of you were supposed to walk that trail again, she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city. Then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring. She began laughing. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a problem with sleep talking. It was something much more. Something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer about merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into the bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, holding up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple more hours yet. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice. Still that same low-pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch writing this out, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself. More so I believe than the typical falling in love story. No, I fear that the infatuation I felt was the entity slowly taking control of me. Of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions, and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur, and she would be free of it. I know I should leave, that I should open the front door, get in my car, and drive away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated.